Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Nathan and today we're going to be covering the topic of do you need a tank in Dungeons & Dragons, specifically in 5th edition. This is going to be a little bit of a more of kind of a game design type video. And so what prompted me to make this video? Well, online on Reddit and that kind of thing, I see a lot of people asking kind of questions about this, such as, my group is this. We have a cleric and a druid and a wizard and a warlock and I need to play the tank. I've also heard people saying, I'm playing the tank of the party and I go down all the time. Here's what I'm doing. Please help. Additionally, I've also heard this from a dungeon master I played with at a convention. He said, wow, another party without a tank. And in all honesty, hats off to the guy DMing for randoms at a convention. You're doing a great job. But and there's more stories I can tell you about playing at Comic-Con if you guys are interested. But overall in the community, there seems to be this kind of desire or underlying assumption a lot of players have that you need to have a tank. So in this video, I'm going to kind of cover and talk about some things relative to tanking in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. So here is our agenda. First, I'm going to define what is a tank. And this is going to be kind of the definition that I'm assuming people are using when they're talking about this. Note that being tanky does not equal being a tank, and we'll talk about that more later on. Next, we'll talk about, does Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition have tools to kind of help you be a tank as described in the classical definition. Then I'll talk a little bit about focusing fire as a tactic. We'll do a little bit of a counter argument on why some classes have bigger hit dice and will have smaller. I'll talk about something that you can do to be effective in presenting a threat, and then I'll kind of draw a conclusion and answer the question if you haven't already ascertained my opinion by the end of the video. All right, so first up, what is a tank? Now, tank characters typically attract enemy attention and attacks to act as decoys for teammates. They have a couple of key things. So one of the first things that all tanks are expected to have is a high durability, aka their effective hit point pool. This could mean you have a moderate amount of hit points, but you're hard to hit and have some damage reduction and self-healing and that kind of thing. And usually, oftentimes, at least classically, tank characters will sacrifice their own damage output to hopefully achieve this high durability. Additionally, one of the other key aspects of being a tank is you need some way to force enemies to target you. Tanks will typically rely on game mechanics to do this, and they often are going to use abilities purely for survival with a little bit of damage and some control. Again, the main goal of the tank classically is you run in and you make the enemies attack you while everyone else picks them off. So classically, our tank is going to run into all the enemies. All the enemies are going to attack the tank. Then usually there's some kind of healer that heals the tank to keep them alive. And then you have some damage dealers that kill the monsters while the tank absorbs all the damage. This is the kind of what I think most people are talking about when they're talking about playing a tank. This is the kind of classic archetype in a lot of RPGs like World of Warcraft and that kind of thing. And so I think when a lot of people say, I need to play a tank, they're expecting to play the guy in the middle with the shield who's absorbing all the attacks. So, does Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition have tools to kind of support this kind of playstyle? And in order for a playstyle like this to work, the game really needs mechanics and tools to support it. So, first of all, let's talk about durability. When you're playing Dungeons & Dragons, this is going to be your armor class, so how hard it is to hit you, your hit points, so having some kind of healing or temporary hit points to kind of buffer the amount of damage that you're taking, having some kind of damage reduction. This could be things like Heavy Armor Master or potentially a Barbarian's Rage or some kind of damage resistance or that kind of thing. And additionally, you need to have good saving throws to be able to shake off enemy effects. So good armor and shields, and some spells can boost your armor class. There are feats you can take to improve your hit points. You can have a high hit dice class. You can focus your attribute increases on your constitution. As for the healing and temporary hit points, things like paladins have features like lay on hands, and other subclass features have those as well. There are some spells that you can use. Things like the Paladin's Aura of Protection or taking the Mage Slayer or Resilient feats can boost your saves and that kind of thing. So you can make a pretty durable character in Dungeons & Dragons. Now, let's talk about the next aspect of forcing attacks against the tank. And here we run into a little bit of a problem. There's actually nothing in the game in Dungeons & Dragons that says that enemies have to attack us, but there are a few ways that you can and things you can do to heavily incentivize and encourage attacks against you. So, those include, if you're in melee, if an enemy tries to move away from you, they're going to risk an opportunity attack. So if this is a way that you can potentially keep enemies from running in and engaging the people on the back line. If you have the Sentinel feat, this does make this a little stronger, as it will keep them from moving, and you sometimes can get an attack in if they attack someone who's right up in with you. The next thing is something like Reckless Attack out of Barbarian. If you make yourself easier to hit, this can help make you a more inviting target, so that is a way to encourage attacks. You also have Grappling. So when you grapple an enemy, they can't move away from you, and if they only have a melee attack, they're probably going to attack you. Additionally, the grappled condition makes it so that the creature that's grappled has disadvantage on all attacks against anyone other than their grappler, so that can be an effective tactic. However, it takes a free hand, so if you're a weapon and a shield guy, you would probably have to either drop the shield or drop your weapon in order to maintain a grapple. So it's probably going to be, you lose the shield, you lose a little bit of survivability to do so. The next way is there's a fair amount of classes or subclasses that have features that give disadvantage against anybody but you. These include the Cavalier Fighter, the Armorer Artificer, and the Ancestral Guardian Barbarian. There's a few spells here like Compelled Duel that you can also use. There are also some features that you can use to protect others, like the Protection Fighting Style. This lets us impose disadvantage on an attack, and this might make enemies want to attack us instead. However, there are a few problems with the tanking tools in D&D 5e. So one of the first ones is that healing specifically can't really keep up with the damage output of monsters in 5th edition. Now, I'm not really going to cover that in depth in this video, and that'll be a topic for another time, but basically the healer isn't going to be able to sustain the tank through the damage of all of the monsters in combat. And even if you build a character designed for durability, most player characters, you're not going to be able to survive the focus of all the monsters for more than 2 rounds. That said, there are some exceptions to this. If you min-max a character pretty hard for survivability, you can be pretty durable against certain encounters, assuming you have all your resources. But that's not always the case, and a well-rounded player character and most player characters in general are not going to be as durable as a min-maxed for survivability type character, and those characters have other problems that we'll talk about later. The next potential problem, none of those abilities that we covered really force enemies to attack us, and a lot of those abilities will use our reaction, and all characters only get 1 reaction per round. So we might be able to make life hell for maybe 1 or 2 enemies at a time, but not all of them. We have some tools, I would say, but there aren't really enough to make traditional tanking where, the tank runs in, focuses all the enemies, and gets kept alive by the healer. That's not really possible. Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition doesn't really have the tools and mechanics to actually make that a viable strategy. All right, next we're going to talk about focusing fire, and this is something that is generally speaking an optimal tactic for tabletops in games and kind of turn-based strategy games in general, due to how the action economy works, and I'll give you an example here and show you why. So let's say that we have 2 sides. Each side has 4 characters. They all have 4 hit points, and everybody does 1 damage per round. Our team on the left over there is going to focus fire, and our team on the right is going to pick an opponent, and they're each going to attack their guy. So in the first round, everyone on the team on the left attacks the guy on the right, and he dies. So team 1 gets a kill, and they're all at 3 hit points. Moving on to round 2, well, now our team on the right there only has 3 guys that will make 3 attacks. Our team on the left gets another kill, making it 2-0. Same thing happens in round 3. The enemies are chipping away. Some people are starting to get low, but now, team 2 is down to just 1 guy. And in the final round, team 2 does indeed get a kill, but team 1 has won 3-0. Well, and 4-1, and if it's D&D, they might just be able to pick up their teammate who has gone down. And so, as you can see, the team of 4 that focused fire was able to bring down another team of 4 with only 1 casualty. Now, they did lose, about half of their hit points, They have 6 hit points out of 16 left, so a little more than half, but they were able to take down all the enemies without taking any casualties. So, generally speaking, focus fire is a really good tactic, and combats often pivot on action economy. One of the key things in Dungeons & Dragons is that a player on 1 hit point is just as effective at dealing damage as a player who is on full hit points, because they still get a turn, and there's nothing that cripples you. So in that example, the characters that were still on 1 hit point were still doing just as much damage and contributing just as much, because your player is either alive or they're dead. And obviously dead enemies can't do anything. So if you focus the enemies down, that's, a very good way of controlling them. If you, spread that damage out, now all the enemies are getting more attacks in. So, if your character goes in alone, like a traditional tank might, and this kind of ties into that second case I made earlier where someone's like, I'm the only tank and I go down all the time, help. Having the enemies focus fire on them actually makes that character die faster and helps the enemies actually do more ideal tactics by you're encouraging the enemies to focus their fire. Dying quickly is a legitimate risk. And remember, healing isn't really sufficient to keep a player alive through the focused fire of all the monsters. You're not going to be able to keep that player topped up. At best, you'll be able to pick them up when they go down, but that's about it. Additionally, again, there are no tools in 5th edition to make all the monsters attack a tank, so the monsters might just ignore the tank. And this is kind of our next big problem. And we'll talk a little bit more about this later. Simply taking damage or healing as a player, it actually doesn't really advance the fight because you're not actually killing the monsters. You're not making them go away. It's my personal opinion that every player should probably build a balanced character, not over-investing in offense or defense. If you can get the monsters to split fire and attack everybody, and everybody takes a little bit of damage, you can usually kill all the monsters without actually having anyone go down. And remember, a player with 1 hit point, it does just as much as a player with full hit points. So, if a character is injured, like, say, the person who ran in first, the rest of the party should cover for them and allow them to retreat back without dying and take some hits in turn. So, again, share the damage around the party. All right, we're going to do a brief little counter argument here about why classes have different hit dice. One of the things I often hear in videos is, oh, he's playing a barbarian, he has a d12 hit dice, he's supposed to be taking hits. And I don't actually agree with that, and let me explain a little bit why. So, the question is, if you have a large hit dice, does that automatically make you a tank? And as an indicator, you're supposed to be taking hits for your allies. So one of the things here is that having range is a form of defense. Most enemies are melee, and this is a big thing here. If an enemy has to take, a dash to be able to reach you, that's a turn where you're not taking damage because the enemy is not taking an action. So usually speaking, the classes that are going to play from longer range, whether it's a sorcerer or a wizard or, a rogue, that kind of thing, those classes usually have worse hit dice and worse armor proficiencies. And then the closer you get to the enemies, the larger your hit dice is, the more hit points you have, and usually the better armor class you have. Yeah, so again, classes that have larger hit dice, that's a pretty direct correlation with having better armor class via their armor. So, because most enemies are melee in the game, characters who play at close range have better armor class and hit points because naturally they're going to be targeted more. A monster is likely going to be using their action to attack a target they can reach, rather than, dashing to someone who's further away. Plus, you might risk an attack of opportunity from a melee player. This doesn't mean as a melee character with a large hit dice, you should intentionally be taking all of the hits. Some of the balance here is because those classes are naturally going to be targeted more. All right, now we're going to talk about presenting a threat. Now, a little bit earlier, we talked about monsters ignoring the tanky character. So now we're going to talk about why you might be ignored and some things that you can do to fix it. All right, so if a character goes all in on defense without much damage or controllability, the monsters can and probably should save that character for last. Even if you have an ability that gives disadvantage against everyone else, it's entirely possible that everyone else is still going to be easier to hit than the tank character. So, if you have an armor artificer who has an armor class of over 20, and the monsters have disadvantage to hit everyone else, but everyone else has like an AC of 15. The monster actually has a better chance to hit those other characters, and so they should probably be attacking them anyway. Additionally, the monsters will probably should be and will usually pursue someone who's dealing damage or throwing down a powerful control effect over someone who is in a hardened shell and wielding a little feather and just tickling. Now, I've found that, at least the DMs that I've played with, they'll often have monsters target you, even if you don't have an ability that forces them to do so, if you do one of the two following things. Number one, you output a lot of damage. Or number two, you concentrate on a powerful spell. If you build a well-rounded character who has decent offensive abilities and has a reasonably good defense, you'll probably attract proportionally more attention because you do more damage, and you'll be able to use those defenses. And the bottom line here is that if you're advancing the fight and kind of tipping the scales in favor of your party, your DM will probably shift some of the monster attention your way in an attempt to shut you down. So I know for myself and my experience, and I know it may be different for you and your DM at your table, oftentimes one of the best ways I've found to get monsters to attack me is do something powerful, and then that tends to help. All right, let's conclude here. So to answer the question, do you need a tank? And my answer here is no. And again, this is just my opinion. If you're welcome to disagree, and please let me know in the comments if you do, and feel free to explain why. Why? So I have a few reasons here. One, the game isn't really built for tanking, at least in the traditional classical sense, like the example that we see up there. The game mechanics, as we reviewed, don't really support it. Number two, going in alone is bad. If you go alone, you're very likely to be focused down and drop quickly. One of my pointers for if you're playing a character in a party that has a bunch of ranged characters and you're the only one who is melee and is on the front line, what you should do is you should hang back with the rest of the party and let the enemies come to you. That way you can take advantage of your party's range. You can make the monsters waste turns getting to you, and you can potentially share and spread out some of the damage among the party. Oftentimes, that complaint of I'm the tank, I'm the only frontliner, and I go in all the time, and I go down all the time. What I've seen happens there is usually when asked about how they play, that player runs in alone, all the monsters surround them and beat them down, and then they're like, "Crap, I died again." That's bad strategy. I'm sorry, but you shouldn't be running in alone. That's not a good idea. All right, the next tip is that presenting a threat advances the fight, so killing or controlling enemies, and draws attention. And this is something that we just talked about. If you play a balanced character and present a threat, I think you'll do a much better job of actually winning the fight. Now, that said, you can play what I would call a protector character. A character that has one of the subclasses that's traditionally thought of as a tank can usually easily distract an enemy or two. And one of the best things that you can do here is if one of your allies is being focused, you go after the enemy that's attacking them and potentially forcing them to switch targets or take defensive measures or just die. And that's actually a really, really good thing to do. It's pretty darn effective. Again, though, I wouldn't, focus on tanking the entire encounter, but rather potentially you pick the one or two enemies that might be the most dangerous to the other characters, and you try to make life hell for them. The rest of the enemies can kind of go about your party. In reality, oftentimes it's, 2 or 3 characters focusing on an enemy at a time rather than the whole party, and usually there is a little bit of split focus. But yeah, if you want to be this kind of tank character, I wouldn't go for the classical, I tank the whole encounter, but I'm going to protect an ally or two. Now, diving a little bit into more of do you need a tank? Honestly, I don't think you need, hardcore need a protector character in a party. It's good, but it's by no means required. As a matter of fact, I don't think you actually need any role in particular in a party. I think one of the big things is so long as there isn't too much overlap between characters, you can have a fun and effective party. And it's really, the DM is probably going to design encounters that's going to challenge who is playing with them, and not necessarily encounters that will require you to make a perfect party by any means. Some players, like myself, often like to build characters that are going to fill the biggest void that they see in the party, but that's by no means required. If you have a party, that is a bunch of backliners and you have someone pressuring you to say, oh, we're all playing this, you need to play the tank, you don't need to play the tank. I think you should play the character that is going to be fun for you, and it doesn't really matter because your party can and should adapt their tactics with the characters that you have, not the characters that someone thinks that you should have. So, thanks for watching. This has kind of been our video on do you need a tank in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition? And I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think every party needs a tank or protector character? Let me know in the comments, please. Do you think there's any role that is required for a given party? I also want to hear about if you have experience playing what you would call a tank character, and was it similar to or different from kind of what I described and talked about in this video? I want to know about it in the comments, and if you have any ideas for kind of more topical things you want to see in the future, or just any builds that you'd be interested in seeing me create, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear about it. Once again, my name is Nathan. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.